So, with the rise of UGC and honestly a ton of creator content, there is a lot of content out there, and making content is more accessible than ever. But what we're seeing is that brands are kind of starting to struggle on standing out. UGC really worked for them, but if everybody's doing it, you kind of feel like you're in the sea of sameness. What are you going to do to be unique and to stand out? The best brands are always trying to answer that question. And what I want to do is today talk a little bit about how you can actually do that. And maybe you remembered a few episodes ago, I talked about this commercial that we had made for Buffy, and we brought in 50 strangers to test out bed sheets. It was this huge production, and a lot of people that I showed that saw this ad was like, "Oh my gosh, we need more content like this. We want to do content like this." And I think it kind of struck a chord with a lot of people because when you think about the typical kind of content you see from most D2C brands, it kind of feels the same. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't do creator content. I'm not saying you shouldn't do UGC, and that's not the point here. But great brands are always trying to find ways to go beyond that. How are they going to stand out? And I want to talk about kind of that top of funnel ad and talk about I think that in 2025 we're going to see more of this. I think we're going to see more brands taking bigger bets, bigger swings. And if you think about it from a technology, AI kind of perspective, there's a lot of ads that will be a little bit even easier to create. And so there's going to be systems and optimizations and efficiencies, but the true riches are going to be in the inefficiencies. It's going to be in the spaces where people actually take some time to think and really say, what is the human take on your brand, your product? And I think that is where it's going to be really special. And that's what I kind of want to talk about today. Don't worry, I'm not pitching crazy, massive productions. We're actually going to talk about not only how to do this and think about it, but how can we make this approachable for any brand, right? So for most brands, like yeah, you're not going to be able to bring in 50 strangers. There's other ways in which to test new and interesting frameworks of content, which we'll get to by the end. So I don't want you to kind of glaze over because you feel like, oh, I'm not this big brand. This is going to be accessible for everybody. And I really want to talk about thinking how do you think about top of funnel ads? So if you realize we gotta look, just want to take a second to take in the view here. We're increasing the look and feel, which is awesome. We got to add a little lamp here. Things are looking good here at Ghetto. So excited to chat. All right. So I'm looking at my notes down here. What I want to start with or talk about is creative diversity. Okay. So I want you to imagine four quadrants, and I'm gonna just if you're on the video, you'll see me making an X or a plus sign. That's a better way of putting it. And on the X axis, so left to right, you have statics and videos. And on the Y axis, you have lo-fi, hi-fi. Okay. If you want to succeed, you really want ads in all four quadrants. Some brands will have a higher concentration in areas. And, a lot of times when you think about brands starting out, it's going to be mainly statics and lo-fi video. Why? Because it's easier to shoot. Like you can use your iPhone and you can make an ad. So it's very approachable to make ads. But as you start to scale and you want to stand out, you start to need to find ways in which to incorporate all sorts of styles of content, not just the ones that worked when you first started. And so you want to be thinking about this quadrant. And now I'm not just saying that for me. Like Meta's coming out and saying the same thing. I was just on a conversation with a Meta rep today, and they were talking about creative diversity. They were talking about needing more content and needing different frameworks and different styles and doing a lot of testing. So the platforms are trying to get brands to do other things, not just, your typical creator content. So that being said, the higher fi content tends to scare people, and maybe people assume that it's, oh, it's out of budget, we can't do that. And I think that if you want to kind of crack performance, thinking about higher fi content can actually be a really great way to get performance. Now, the way I look at hi-fi video mainly, and that's really where I want to kind of center on, is less about the quality of camera. And it's more about the idea and execution of that idea. So often people say, oh, well, you shoot on a nice camera, people are going to know that's an ad. I don't want to watch it, all this stuff. Look, great content, that's what people want to see. Whether that's from a creator or from a nice camera does not matter. One thing that you have to understand though is that if you only do creator content or if you only are shooting on your iPhone, you are limited by what you can do. But if you think about not by the camera, but you're just like, I just want the best ideas and I'm going to find the equipment and the people to create those best ideas that are best for your brand. Your ideas are limitless. Now you can do very interesting things. So when I think about hi-fi video, it's less about, oh, we're shooting on a cinema camera. Yeah, sure. Okay. That's nice. But it's more so about what can we do? And this is for me as a provider of a lot of, we do lo-fi, but we also do hi-fi. As a provider, what can we do that brands internally can't do? Okay, well, if a creator is one person on camera, can I get 50 people on camera? Can I, y- you know, do things and have interesting shot perspectives that need to have specialized lenses that an iPhone could just never do? Can I shoot in locations that just would feel impossible to do? This is not necessarily, oh, oh, you gotta have the nicest camera. It's just using tools and equipment to get the execution of different ideas that a creator just could not do. That's what we want to be talking about. And there's just so many limitations to lo-fi content. I'm not saying don't do it. We offer it. We do it. I live and breathe that stuff. But also, you cannot let that be the only way. You can't let that be the only content format that you can do. You're going to hit a wall. Eventually, you're not going to be able to scale beyond that. And if you want to get into other channels, whether that's connected TV, other streaming platforms, YouTube, all this stuff, you have to expand beyond just your typical UGC. So creative diversity can unlock new ways of communicating your value to customers. If you see it less, again, about okay, what's the difference between an iPhone and a cinema camera? No, no, no. That's not the way to look at it. It's what ideas you get to execute with new camera gear and a team versus a one creator. All of a sudden, those are new ways in which to communicate your brand value and your product values. And that is really at the end of the day what brands need to continue to find is new ways to communicate their value. Creative diversity, whether it's visually diverse from a static and video perspective, is kind of like a lagging factor. Like, yes, you'll get, if you think about that quadrant, yes, you'll get all of those and you like need all of those, but you need all of those quadrants to be filled because you have interesting, diverse ways in which to communicate your product value and your brand values. And I think that's what tends to get missed. And so when people think about top of funnel, when they think about hi-fi stuff, they just kind of chuck it off to be like, oh, that's brand marketing. That doesn't drive performance right away. We need, direct attribution, direct ROI. But think about the best brands. They are not, they're breaking, kind of your best practices. They're the ones that are coming up with interesting ideas and they're able to do that because they're not limiting how they're creating content. So that opens up this idea of interesting ways to communicate value. And I think if you're going to start a brand, you definitely need to start with some direct response ads. You got to get customers. You can't get to do the fun projects and the interesting videos if you don't even know how to sell to your customers and you just don't even have sales, right? So obviously we're kind of talking kind of from a perspective of you have some early adoption, you're working your way up. So as this is my caveat for the episode. I don't want you to think like I'm just saying, "Hey, blow your your first $10,000 on this crazy shoe. You have no idea if it's gonna work out, but, YOLO," right? Like, I'm not saying that. So you definitely need that direct response. You definitely wanna get those early customers. Sell, 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 absolutely. But over time, you need to find new ways to sell your product. And once you start to grow, you have a little bit of budget, you got the ability to try new approaches with the foundation that the business is kind of already set in a way. And is like an arbitrary way of thinking about it. But you want to think about what are some big swings to build brand. I know and performance, we never talk about brand. It's brand versus performance. It's this huge, fight. It doesn't have to be that way. In fact, brand equals performance. And that's because we want to find new ways to communicate your value. And that doesn't always have to be just direct. Do you have this problem? Well, here's the solution. It doesn't always have to be that way. And I think what's hard when it comes to some of these bets that you take is that you might not see the direct correlation of a purchase like right away. Like, I made this ad, I get the purchase. But over time, building a brand can create great performance and efficiency later in the year. And I think I don't know what episode it was, but a few episodes ago, maybe it was the YouTube video. We want to be planning Q4 in January, right? So we want to be thinking about how do we have success in Q4, which most brands are trying to have success in that time. The winners are always the people that invest in content starting in January. Also, if you're taking big bets, big swings, big brands, like just trying to find new ways to communicate your value, you will start to attract people into your funnel. And maybe they don't fulfill and buy in one day or within one ad, but over time, they will start to get to know you, your brand, and then they'll want to buy your product. And it's so important to be always trying to hit some of these top of funnel, interesting ways to talk about the brand to bring them into some of that more direct response type of content. Now, top of funnel ads should have a lens of performance. It's not just like shooting for vibes. Don't get me wrong, but it's about finding interesting ways in which to communicate your value. And usually, when it comes to things like a top of funnel creative, you actually really want to think about stories, narratives, and really playing with that and allowing you to talk and communicate your value in a way that visually is different than what you're typically seeing and maybe what you've done in the past. And I think for consumers, they are kind of used to seeing a lot of direct response creator content. So if they see something very different, that impact is going to be huge. That's going to make them stop, right? And I think in general, how media is consumed always changes. The kind of pendulum swings back and forth. So one time there was no lo-fi content. It was all hi-fi. It was all beautiful, pretty. And now you're seeing people just like let it rip off their iPhone in a car, and that's like crushing, right? But if everybody then is doing that thing, you got to find a new way to communicate. And there's always you got to always be on top. What worked last year does not necessarily mean it's going to work this year. You got to always be finding new ways to create content that's engaging and that will stand out. And if you take these bets, you will stand out because a lot of people are shooting it in a certain way. So the other kind of part to not only the impact, but you want to create stuff that's shareable, right? It's just more approachable, right? Instead of being sold to, people don't really love being sold to, but if you create an interesting, compelling piece of content, not only will they share it, it's just your brand becomes more approachable, right? Because it feels like you're inviting them in versus like you going to them and being like, buy my product. And I think that is what consumers really want to see. They want interesting content. People don't care about it being an ad. There's plenty of great ads that I've seen, and most people are like, wow, that's a great ad. They like good content. If that engages them, that's what they care about. If it ends up selling them, they don't mind that. That's fine. It's just that you want to find new ways in which to do that and create content. So a lot of the ways I think about kind of top of funnel content and, kind of more of these big swings is showing and not telling. And I think like if we go back to the example of Buffy and the Buffy ad that I talked about, it was 50 people coming in and testing out sheets. The first thing was before they ended up knowing what the product was, so they didn't know what the product was. They come in blindfolded. They don't even know that there's a bed behind them. They're just being asked questions about sleep, all this stuff, and you can get their natural reactions to these questions. It was a little bit riskier of a shoot because you don't know like how are people going to react? Are they going to react well? Are they not going to react well? Who knows? And then you obviously have like them actually trying out the sheets and you get their live reaction. And the thing is like we had made many ads about why people should use those bed sheets. And those worked, don't get me wrong. But what's interesting about this was that we didn't have to tell people what the sheets were. The strangers, the people just organically being like, wow, this is so cool to the touch. Like, this is crazy. That was them telling about the product. They weren't scripted. They weren't saying anything that like, it was just showing and not telling. And the thing is that you want to find ways in which you can show your product and not have to tell it, right? As I said, when you're first starting out, you got to get your early customers. You got to like figure out ways in which to communicate it and to, it's like one-on-one sales. But as you get bigger and you want to start to tell your brand and really start to build your brand story, you need to find compelling ways to show and not tell, right? You can't just be like, this is what we're about, right? It's all about action at the end of the day. And sometimes if you're just kind of ramming messages down people's ears, not throats, but their ears, it's just that they see so much. There's just no impact. But if you can find a visual or do something that is just different, and that all of a sudden will create a lasting impact and it will start to resonate. And again, going to that example of just like, instead of us trying to say like, uh, hey, come buy the sheet. Like, are you a hot sleeper? Come and buy the sheets. We were able to ask people their most common issue with sleeping, which shocker is heat and being like just being too hot or too cold or just like they can't sleep with their partner well. Like all common things. Cool. What would help? Probably these sheets. Oh, test out the sheets. Oh, okay, great. These are amazing sheets. Boom. Done. It's over. And that's a huge winner, right? And just the reactions was the selling point. That was it. And we just created an environment to get that. And no creator could do that, right? Like if you were just only, only creator content works, only UGC works, you would never be able to get that. And you would just always be trying to be like, okay, how are we going to sell more sheets? I don't know. Do we need 20 more creators? Maybe, but maybe take that budget and try something different. And that's what we did. Now, what I think as we're kind of ending out here, I want to think about organic content frameworks. So you think about it, let's take that as an example, I think it's like, okay, what are great pieces of organic content? And then how do you frame those into approachable top of funnel ads? We want to make sure that all ads should sell. Just some are going to be more direct than others, but they should all sell. I think again, when people think about high five, they're like, oh, it just looks pretty. It's so pretty. It's like, no, it's not just about being pretty. There should be a lens of performance there. Again, this allows you to have content formats that like a creator couldn't do that. So like, yeah, I'm definitely glad that I was able to have lights and a studio to do this kind of shoot, right? So let's say you don't have any limitations on content frameworks or possibility. You've got the cameras, you've got everything. You want to think about, well, what is the things that people are actually watching online now? And then how can you add that lens of performance to it? So the reality is I didn't make this idea up. Cut, which is a YouTube channel, actually based here in Seattle. No affiliation to them, but love them. Been watching them for many years now. Their framework is basically we bring in strangers, we ask them a compelling question. Like we bring in 100 strangers, we ask them a compelling question, and the answers and the reactions is the video. Millions of views every single time. And then they've been able to do like lots of different frameworks off of that. But essentially, it's bring in a stranger, ask them a uncomfortable topic or question, and do it. Cool. Talking about sleeping is not uncomfortable, but the idea that you just are in a studio and then you have people like just answering questions is I knew that was going to work. It was already done. I just then added in a lens of performance of, well, let's ask questions about the problem. So instead of telling what the problem is, we already knew that heat is like a huge issue for sleepers. We already knew that. But if you can ask them and let them tell the audience that, they will relate. And then all of a sudden it's okay, now let's actually test out the sheets. Instead of be telling them that they're going to be cool by the sheets, why don't they just try for themselves? Boom. That framework was, I knew that that was going to work. It was already done. We just add that lens of performance. And so if you're thinking about, well, what should we do for our top of funnel ads? Find frameworks of content you actually watch, right? Like, I don't think that most people are like, oh man, I just really want to like watch ads. Like, yes, advertisers do, marketers do. Like, I love that. Don't get me wrong, but like, I am not your typical person. So don't follow my watching patterns, right? But if I follow watching patterns of friends who are not in advertising or not in marketing, that's what I want to know. I'm asking them, what are you watching? What's interesting to you? And then I'm thinking about, okay, if that's what's interesting to consumers, then let's figure that out. Pro tip, if you think about your ideal customer, think about what is your ideal customer watching on YouTube? Who are the people that they're following on Instagram? Look at those people's content. Maybe there's something there that is interesting to them. These are where you can start to kind of get ideas. Now, as I said, we will talk a little bit about budget. Okay. A lot of times people will come to me and say, oh man, that sounds great and all, but that's a lot of money. I don't want to waste that money. Here's the thing. People assume that some of these ideas just take a ton of money and like, oh, all these marketing dollars, they're going to get wasted, all this stuff. I don't think that has to be the case. If you are resourceful, you can actually do a lot of these concepts on a smaller budget and do it in a smaller test to begin with, right? So if you're feeling like, I don't want to bring in 100 people into the studio, yeah, probably don't do that. But like, what is the version of like bringing 5 strangers in? Right? Like, what could you do on a smaller scale, test it. Then when you feel confident about that, you go and take that bigger swing because hey, this is working. Like we could do this again and run it and do it a lot bigger and, make iterations off of it, etc. And so funny enough, we did the Buffy shoot first, but then recently we were like, oh, why don't we just do that for like a few of the other brands? We had a food brand that we did this with. We did this with another kind of product. So we asked them a compelling question, and that was really interesting. We had like basically like a not like a blind food taste test, but like a taste test. Like we brought in changes. They didn't know what they were going to do. We had them talk about the differences of these two food products, the generic brand versus the brand. And we were able to just like have natural reactions and shoot that content. That wasn't that crazy. Like that was actually shot right here. Okay. Or gray backdrop. The paper is $75 for a roll of paper, probably one light, a camera, and expensive. You could use your iPhone doing this if you wanted to. It was a table. It was the product. It was literally like super small. And then you paid for people to come in, 30 minutes each person. That's going to take you what, 2.5 hours to shoot 5 people, get a lot of content. You edit it, obviously, but like, it doesn't have to be like this $200,000 shoot to do something like this, right? It's just a matter of taking the time to be resourceful and taking the time to think about interesting ad frameworks and content frameworks. I think so often people are so focused on efficiency and systems and all this stuff that it's like, look, if you're trying to do all that, you are going to get a system. You're going to, get things like maybe done faster. But there are times where it's just like maybe you should pause and think and have space to think and look at the world and say, what are people actually looking at? What excites people? And then how can I create that type of content and make it approachable? Still has a lens of performance, but it's approachable. I think we're going to start to see more content like this in 2025. I know that this is a main focus when we're working with brands, right? It's like they should come to us for interesting ideas. And I want to be attracting interesting ideas and I want to be creating interesting ideas. And I think that when you can build a really great system, consistent system of content from creators, and you should absolutely, but when you think about what's going to make you stand out, you have to find just moments that you can take a little bit bigger of a swing, think about it from a more of a top of funnel perspective, and create content frameworks or content formats you haven't done before that show and don't tell, that has a narrative, that has a story, that has something to it that's just different than the direct response stuff. Am I here to claim that's dead? No, I'm not. Maybe. Who knows? I'm not the one to say yes or no to that. I'm not gonna, that's not a hot take. But what I do know, what I am betting on, is authentic, raw, interesting content that tells a great story or shows a product in an interesting way. We're gonna see more of that. And I think that is what's going to help people stand out on the timeline. Yes, have a foundation of in great systems for ads, statics, graphics, videos, all that stuff. But it's that top corner hi-fi video that is the opportunity. That is where you can really start to find scale. And again, it's not because it's shot on a nice camera, but it's more so about the idea itself. You are limited by ideas based on what you can produce with a phone and one creator at home. But if you start to think about how am I going to expand my communication styles to new consumers, to new people, how am I going to stand out? It's in that upper corner where it is a little bit harder to produce. It does take a little bit more time to think, but it is in those harder moments of production that you're going to find real value that's going to create efficiency across all those other foundational things. Your creator content will become more efficient because you have those interesting top of funnel videos that are a little bit more higher fire, just interesting, etc. Right? Everything becomes more efficient. You start to perform better when you have new ways to find diversity of communication styles. That's it. That's another episode of In the Cutting Room. I'm Matthew. Thank you so much for listening, watching. Make sure to subscribe, like, do all the YouTube things, all the podcast things, leave a review, I guess. Follow me on Twitter at MatthewGattozzi.com or just Matthew Gattozzi, X, LinkedIn, Good O Studios. You know the drill. If you are thinking about top of funnel content, want to chat, I'm always here to answer as many questions as possible. DM me, always open. If you want to chat, cool. Let's do it. Let's make it happen. Hopefully this was helpful. I'm excited for another episode. All right, that's it. Peace.